Welcome to Greenhouse Grower to Grower, the podcast where we talk to growers from across the greenhouse industry about market trends, innovation, their biggest challenges and opportunities, and more. I'm Brian Sparks, editor of Greenhouse Grower. We're excited to kick off our 2026 podcast season with a conversation with Dr. Charlie Hall, AmericanHort's chief economist, professor and Ellison Chair at Texas A&M University, and coordinator of the Executive Academy for Growth and Leadership Program for Horticultural Business Certification, otherwise known as EAGL. In this episode, we look back at how the green industry performed in 2025 and the economic factors that will impact 2026. Here's our conversation. So, Charlie, thanks for joining me today. Figured it's a great time. We're catching up in mid-December where each of us have our own horror stories of early winter snow, depending on where everybody lives right now. So thought it'd be a great time, though, to take a step back. Let's look at how 2025 went for the green industry. And then as we look ahead to 2026, some of the things that you're monitoring. So again, appreciate you taking the time to join me today.
I'm glad to be here, Brian. Thanks for the invite.
Absolutely. So let's start off with 2025. Just want to get your initial impressions on the overall economic performance of the green industry as you wrap up this year.
Yeah, you know what? There's a key word that starts with an M that comes to mind, and it's called mixed. Because, if you remember back on the stage at Cultivate, I talked about a bell-shaped curve of sales for growers. I mean, I was talking specifically growers that would either gone through my EAGL program or part of the Year Market Metrics benchmarking program.
Mm-hmm.
And it was ranging from up 25% over last year to down 25%. And it was a true bell-shaped curve, which means that half the people were feeling good and half the people were not feeling so good. But then here's the point that I made subsequently is that just because you're down year over year doesn't mean that the wheels are coming off the bus. That just means that you could have had a historical year last year.
Yeah.
You didn't beat it this year. You were going to be down, and by whatever percentage. So year over year comps are just part of the story. So within the benchmarking that I do, I generally will take the 3-year average and then compare it to the 3-year average.
Right.
And then I was only talking about top line sales when I mentioned the bell-shaped curve. You got bottom line.
Yeah.
Now, when I ask folks about bottom line year over year, it's the same bell-shaped curve, except the two tails on each end were higher.
Mm-hmm.
Some were up significantly and some were down significantly. But again, you can't just look at year over year comps and say whether it's a good year or a bad year. It just was different than last year. So I always am quick to tell growers and landscapers, retailers, that you use metrics and benchmarks to gauge performance, but you don't use those to run your business.
Right.
Yeah, because even though we're all growing high quality plants or installing high quality plants or retailing high quality plants, we know that not all plants are created equal, even though they're all high quality. I've never gone into a grower's place and said, and hear them say the words, you know what? I wish I could grow quality, but my quality sucks. I've never heard it. Never, ever.
Right.
And so quality is one of those things, though, that is the foot to get you in the door.
Sure.
And so anyway, I'm digressing a little bit, but all right. So that's grower level.
Yeah.
Retail, from some of Danny Summers' information from the Garden Center Group and some of the benchmarking that we do on Year Market Metrics, and Ian Baldwin takes the lead on that. It's the same story. Mixed performance depending on what part of the country that you are at. And of course, at the retail, weather plays a big role in terms of sell-through. And if you've got regions of the country that didn't necessarily have a stellar weather year, those regions were behind the 8 ball. And we saw some of that this year.
Yeah.
In the same way as landscapers. During the pandemic, landscaping was one of the only service of areas within the green industry. Well, all industries.
Yeah.
Landscapers did quite well during the pandemic, and because they're doing their service outside. You didn't have to be face to face with
That's right.
customer. Then you could do your work and so forth and get the job done and interact maybe if the customer came out to talk with you, but then you were outside, so you could distance easily and so forth. So landscapers actually did well because people were staying at home. They were they were looking around the yard saying, "Geez, this sucks. I gotta do something about this place." And so they invested in landscape services during that time period. So landscapers during the pandemic had a great time. They were backed up sometimes 8 to 9 months to the ones I've talked to. They had a backlog of jobs.
Right.
Then you got some that were that had backlogs of jobs over a year, but they were kind of the exception to the rule.
Right.
That whole backlog thing has gone away, right? The folks have put in those jobs, and they didn't necessarily have to phase them in
Right.
3 phases, right, or 4 phases. People went ahead and bit the dust and not bit the dust, they bit the bullet in terms of paying for those landscapes. And so landscaping, was quite good. And
Yeah.
there are certain regions of the country where it's still good because the housing sectors in those respective states or regions are doing quite well. Here in Texas, it's like we hadn't even stopped. It's still going on.
Hmm.
And, here locally and even in College Station, Texas, there's a lot of building going on. So
Yeah.
there's the subsequent flower, shrubs, and trees that have gotta go around those new buildings.
Yeah.
So that's, again, it's pretty mixed performance to regardless of which sector that you talked about, and a lot of that mixed performance came down to either, weather conditions.
Hmm.
You can't blame it all on weather, and then, of course, the uncertainty that went along with a post-pandemic environment and new administration and so forth, a lot of
Right.
economic uncertainty. And quite frankly, Brian, a lot of people misuse some of those COVID relief monies,
Sure. Absolutely.
and they could have used them for paying down long-term debt or keeping employees employed like they were supposed to.
Hmm.
And, you know, the lot of went into CapEx, and a lot of it went into building tradable assets and building inventory. So many of the issues that some are wrestling with now came from misusing some of their working capital during the pandemic,
Sure.
thinking that the glory days were going to live on forever, and that expanded demand that we saw was going to keep on indefinitely, and that's not been the case. We've been moving sideways.
Right.
So if you look at the GDP data, line 129 in the public accounts data, within the GDP database,
Yeah.
held by the Bureau of Economic Analysis, well, line 129 is flowers, seeds, and potted plants. And that we saw the lift during the pandemic where the sales were expanding and then a flattening,
Hmm.
flattened for the last 3 years. Now we've
Yeah.
had some dips that, you know, kinda surprised me a little bit. We had some dips, and I thought, "Oh, no. We're gonna go back to trend like we normally do after a recession or something,
Yeah.
sort of economic contraction. We go back to trend, and then we start our glacial growth again." But this time, we got the shot in the arm, and we hadn't gone back to trend,
Hmm.
moving sideways.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty good descriptor of the industry right now. We're moving sideways.
Well, and that sideways number that we're at right now, and I know you've alluded to this in quite a few of the talks you've given this year, is what that number is now, and I think the phrase I hear sometimes is consistently inconsistent over the past few years. But if you compare where we are now, maybe in the past couple of years, to pre-pandemic, that number is still quite a bit higher than we were, in the late 2010s, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And for all sectors.
Yeah.
Yeah, so as a green industry, we benefited from the pandemic, no doubt about it. Anytime people are staying at home more, traveling less,
Mm,
spending less on bars and hotels and restaurants and airplanes, etcetera, we're gonna sell more because people they remember their roots, pun intended,
right.
and they plant more and they're looking for something. They're either looking for aesthetics, which is only a piece of the puzzle,
Hmm.
or they're looking for something to do with their kids, or looking for something to reduce their stress, or looking for an alternative to high-priced vegetables they perceive in the supermarket. So they're going to grow their own veggies and so forth,
Right.
even though, that we economists really know that when you start growing your own vegetables, you come up with these enormous, beautiful looking tomatoes that are just almost blemish free and everything, but they cost you $60.
Right. Exactly.
I'm being facetious. I'm being a little bit funny there,
Yeah.
but it's not always meant to be, we're gonna grow our own food, we're gonna save a lot of money. It doesn't quite work out like that.
Right. You mentioned a couple minutes ago, one of the surprises that you saw this year. Were there any other surprises that you weren't necessarily expecting to play out in 2025 that went a different way than what you were thinking?
No, it pretty much went exactly as I was planning for it to go and forecasting for it to go. There were no surprises whatsoever. I was 100% no,
That's the way it
should
should
be.
be, you know?
That there's always surprises. In fact, there were certain regions of the country that did better than I thought they would,
Mm,
and vice versa. There's always in certain venues, if you compare, say, box stores to garden centers,
yeah,
to, hardware stores, and etcetera. It just continually surprises me how resilient garden centers are
sure.
in the whole mix. They kind of maintain a relatively stable, market share of the retail market, as best as what I can estimate.
Right.
The data there aren't really full enough to be able to ascertain that with 100% certainty, and that not all box stores are created equal.
Hmm.
And the big 3 being, Walmart, Lowe's, and Depot, but you got Menards, you got Aldi, you got, other, um, let's see, what are some others?
Yeah, you got the Lowe's and the Costco's in there, and
Oh, yeah, Costco and so forth. Yeah, you got all those folks that and not all of them, if you look at their earnings reports, not all of them are, necessarily keeping up with the same pace that they did during the pandemic.
sure.
But remember, those guys were deemed to be essential from the get-go.
Yeah,
So they saw stellar sales. I mean, you look at their either top line or even EBITDA, bottom line that they report in their earnings reports, they increased at a pretty good clip during the pandemic, slowed down, plateaued,
hmm,
started decreasing a little bit, and then the orange in the room started it going back, and the blue in the room, started continuing downward. And so very mixed earnings reports the last quarter, between particularly Lowe's and Depot. But
sure.
that's neither here nor there. The resiliency that I see is among garden centers,
Hmm.
but not all those are created equal as well.
No, no, that's
Others
for sure.
who are merchandising fools. I mean, they know how to merchandise. They could sell cardboard as a plant. They're incredible. But there's others on the other side of that spectrum that really need some help in terms of merchandising the plants.
Hmm.
And so they may be focusing on some of the wrong messaging. So what I was pleasantly surprised with, Brian, was the fact that I saw more people talking about the health and well-being benefits of plants,
Yeah.
incorporating that into their sales messaging.
Yeah. Well, I know that that's something that you've talked about a lot. And even just recently, the webinar that you did with Dr. Melinda Knuth in North Carolina State, where you kind of talk about that as well, and how one thing always interacts with the other. So, um, You've talked a lot to this point about, earnings and top and bottom line sales. I do want to ask briefly about, especially growers in this industry who are investing in their own businesses. And, you look back, our top 100 survey, for example, a couple of years ago, we would ask, we looked at the numbers and we saw that most of our list was staying right around the same size in terms of their square footage. But they were telling us, and this was 2022, 2023, they were dealing with supply chain issues and then uncertainties about where the consumer is ultimately going to end up. But they told us, look, watch out a year from now, our numbers are going to start growing. And we did see that on our end, where we saw in our, I think it was 2024 top 100 survey, the size of the top 100 operations got a lot bigger. This year, I think it leveled off a little bit. One of the things that growers were telling us was that they've added the production space. Now they're looking to invest in the tools that they use within their greenhouses and facilities to grow better plants. Are you kind of seeing some of that in some of the things that you're looking at?
Yeah, there's a lot of that, square footage increase, of course, is related back to some of the COVID relief monies
Yeah.
that they received, and they were, again, making decisions about how best to apply that. So they kept their workforce employed, but still that freed up some money for CapEx, and that's what you see in that expanded, square footage.
Sure.
Now, on the bedding plant side, the annuals and bedding plant side, that extra square footage is going to lead to a lot more product that's in the marketplace.
Hmm.
And we also, at the same time, had some increases in pricing
Right.
because we had to. Our input cost increased 22% since 2019. So we've had to increase prices. So you got more product coming through at an increased price, and the question becomes, how much more runway is there to sell that much more product at that higher price? And
Yeah.
when are we gonna rub up against the inelasticity in demand and have to, you know, take a slower approach at those price increases?
Mhm.
But then you got tariffs that are kinda clouding that issue as well. And so that uh, we can't start decreasing prices yet because we still gotta cover the added costs associated with those tariffs. So we're in a conundrum here.
Yeah.
Is that the consumer has been resilient, but that some of that resilience is starting to wear off a little bit.
Mhm.
And so, yeah, you've seen some folks expand, and they're pushing more product through retail level. But it's, you know, again, the question becomes, how much more runway do we have left
Yeah.
to do that?
Well, and I was going to bring it up, but you brought it up for me, the whole tariff situation right now. So, I wonder, how did that affect, or how has it affected growers planning for this coming year, not knowing where some of the tariff policies are going to go? How have you seen that played out so far this year, and how much of an effect do you see that playing out across the industry as we get into 2026?
Yeah, it's definitely going to have an impact because it influences some of the inputs that we use at all levels within the green industry.
Mhm.
Now, not all of our inputs are imported. I'm
Right.
saying that. I'm just saying that there's some key stuff that we bring in that we're having to pay a higher price for. So that's it's going to continue on, and while there's a little bit of a reprieve on the labor side because we have the new interim final rule on
Yeah.
adverse effect wage rate, which I get chuckled every time I say that, the new interim final rule.
Great.
So we'll get differences in wage levels for H-2A workers.
Yeah.
And so the pressure that's been put on in terms when you have an increase on the adverse effect wage rate that tends to elevate domestic wages at the same time, and it's a vicious cycle. That's why there needed to be some sort of change in how that wage rate was determined.
Yeah.
So those increases, again, are going to have to be paid by the growers, which is going to put pressure on price. And I've talked all around that right now, and I need to go back to my original point: is that tariffs are going to continue to put pressure on us, and we make
Right.
a little bit of reprieve from some labor cost, but we still have to deal with those tariffs. Now, one encouraging thing is that there seems to be more dialogue
Mhm.
that's happening in Washington regarding those tariffs.
Right.
Now, I hadn't seen a whole lot of movement in terms of eliminating them yet, but there seems to be more dialogue going on than simply a tweet
Right.
before they actually go into place. Now, that could be it's just a perception on my part, and talking with folks that have been, gone into some of the fly-ins to Washington and so forth. It's
Mhm.
maybe it's just the fact that they had an audience and people listened to them. But there seems to be a little bit of willingness to at least discuss these tariffs. I have no idea whether that's gonna result in anything, but but for sure, we're not gonna get around tariffs in the short run unless SCOTUS steps in and says that they were unconstitutional. So
Yeah.
then we get a little bit of reprieve, and in fact, there'll be a lot of refunding that'll go on. It
Well, and I know you had talked about in one of your presentations earlier this year about, the fact that, exports were, or excuse me, imports from other countries were on the rise as, some of the tariff situation was first playing out. And then it started to flip a little bit as you got into the summer. How did you see that moving through the rest of the year then?
Yeah. It's in fact, everybody was importing like crazy to bring in, the inputs before the tariffs took effect.
Yeah.
And then for several months thereafter, we were selling out of that inventory. And so not only growers, but everybody through the supply chain and retail, everybody was bringing in product as fast as they could, building up inventory. And then for the next 5 or 6 months, they were selling it out of that inventory.
Mhm.
So they didn't have to really raise prices because they had brought in the inputs cheaper and then they stockpiled them. But now, those stockpiles have been dwindled down and they're buying product in at a more expensive rate. And so now we're starting to see some of those inflationary pressures come into play.
Sure.
As we didn't see it a lot in the CPI data or the PCE index. We didn't see a lot of those pressures. So, we there was a lot of folks saying, "Well, what difference does this make it? We're not seeing that much of an impact unless you were an importing agent, a customs broker, and you were paying the tariffs, then you realized it big time."
Yeah.
Because that was one of the key impacts was that, the need for the banking of those tariffs was being that whole brunt of that was being felt by the customs brokers and importing agents.
Mhm.
Every entity is importing, so they were having to pay those tariffs, sending them to Washington, and, that puts a cash flow burden.
Yeah.
All that point of entry that used to be, either in a free trade zone or what have you, all that point of entry was now burdened with coming up with the cash to pay the tariffs. Because unlike what we were told or, by certain individuals while they were campaigning, it's not
Sure.
the exporting country shipping product in here that pays the tariff. It's the customs broker or the importer of record that pays the tariff, and so that's passed on through the supply chain. Now here's a key consideration is 'cause, when let's say that you're a wholesaler within
Mhm.
the industry, a wholesale distributor, and you're having to pay a higher price to some importing entity for a product. Well, you've got a choice when you send it downstream to your customers, whether you charge a higher price or whether you eat some of that increased price cost that's associated with the tariff.
Yeah.
You eat some of it, or you Do you pass on 10% or do you pass on 5% and eat 5%? Those are some of the decisions that people are having to make. How much of this am I going to pass on? And like I said, and you got a consumer that we already don't know how much runway's left,
Yep.
how much more are they going to be able to absorb? So again, so far they're absorbing it because everything's moving sideways,
Right.
not increasing. It's truly moving sideways. But how much longer is that? That's the magic question right there. How much longer is that going to last?
That's going to be the key. And I think that's a nice way also to transition into as we look ahead to 2026. You've got that's, I would imagine, perhaps the biggest indicator of where the market's going to be this coming year. But what are some of the other factors or trends that you see that have the potential to dictate how this industry does, how well it succeeds this coming year?
Yeah, I think it all comes down to the consumer.
Yeah.
And based off of what I'm hearing anecdotally so far,
Right.
Christmas season is going pretty good.
Yeah.
Folks are not pulling back as much as what was probably anticipated. Now it's still, we're a couple, 10 days away from Christmas, but still sales have been really strong. And you see different departments that folks that's, garden centers sell, what is it, 40% of their sales is tied to Christmas season.
Yeah.
Just unbelievable. And there's been some garden centers I've been in where it's getting sparse because they've sold just a ton of product. So that's really that's pretty good news.
Yeah.
And walked into Costco. There wasn't a single tree left. There was a little bit of greenery left. That was all that was left of the Costco Christmas display. It was amazing. It was like somebody had come in and just, wheelbarrowed the stuff out. So, I mean, there's some anecdotal evidence that things are going to go well. But I tell you, for 26, because we haven't had a recession so far in 2025, we only got a few days left, we generally get a spring reprieve whenever a downturn starts.
Yeah.
But we don't start feeling it until the folks are in the throes of a downturn. They've been experiencing it. And then when the recovery starts and people start buying durable goods again, that's when we take it on the chin as an industry. So I don't think there's a lot of headwinds other than the cost related headwinds that I've talked about.
Yeah.
And I don't the resiliency of the consumer has been pretty stellar so far. There's some evidence, like I said, that that's wearing thin a little bit, but for our category, we generally do okay in the spring whenever a contraction starts, and we've not even started that yet.
Right.
So, you know, I think it has the potential for being a pretty good spring if the wheels don't fall off between now and next March.
That's a big if because I think you sometimes never know what's going to happen, from week to week anymore. So, but that's a good, uh, thought to be thinking about here.
Yeah.
As you hear a lot of folks say that, when it comes to, tariffs to some degree, that there's factors that you might assume that you don't have a lot of control over when it comes to where you're going to be in the coming year. What are the factors though that you see that a business owner can control that can determine how profitable or how successful they're going to be
Oh, yeah.
in any given year?
Great question. Number one, they can control how they spend their working capital.
Mhm.
And they can make sure that in the periods of uncertainty that they've got enough working capital to be able to ride out if a contraction starts.
Right.
So no one has an excuse of saying that you weren't forewarned because we've seen plenty of forewarnings this year, tariffs and the the GDP decreases that we saw early on.
Yeah.
I mean, we've seen plenty of signs that things are not as good as what they have been over the last 4 years when we had the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, the CHIPS Act,
Yeah.
and other COVID relief acts that we put into place. Well, Brian, that was working.
Mhm.
Regardless of what one side of the fence was saying, it was working. And ironically, a lot of people on the other side of the fence were taking credit for it working. So
Yeah.
it was quite an interesting period. It still is. But when you invest in that infrastructure, you're gonna get some returns from it. And then when you stop that investment, you're gonna see things slow down, and we're seeing things slow down, seeing the job market weaken, and, we may see when the next monthly report comes out, um, unemployment may go up to 4.5%, which, you know, 2 decades ago, we would have raised a flag in victory if unemployment was 4.5%.
Yeah.
But we've gone through 2 decades of relative prosperity since the Great Recession or a decade and a half, but we don't you don't wanna, waste your working capital and burn through it too quickly, right? You
Right.
have some cash to ride out uncertainty, period. And then, number 2,
Mhm.
I got my trifecta here. I got 3 my three-point sermon, right?
Yep.
Number 2 is no surprise, you gotta sharpen your pencil in terms of your value chain.
Mhm.
You gotta make sure you're shrinking your shrink, you're controlling the touches, within your business, all the things, the pinch points that are increasing your cost structure. You gotta make sure that you got SOPs in place, and you're doing correction of errors, and modifying those SOPs and incorporating, automation, mechanization, technology when it makes sense, that you're not left in the dust, by not knowing what AI can do for your business and so forth. Those are things you can control. And if you don't manage your shrink, that's on you. If
Yeah.
you continue to go down the path of AI is gonna make a big impact, but you're not doing anything about it, that's on you. Right? So those are the things we can control. And certainly AI is going to have an influence on productivity, no doubt, across
Sure.
all businesses, all industries, etcetera. So we have to figure out how best to utilize that within our businesses, and that's why, in my Eagle reunion, program over the last couple of years, that's been a big emphasis is how can we best utilize the AI capabilities. So that's number 2,
Mhm.
managing and sharpening your pencil. But number 3, it's all about relationships, right? This is a relationships business. No matter
Sure.
what sector that you're in, and you're the working with your customers, you got to be able to articulate your value proposition. And those are not necessarily words that we emphasize too much when we're growing plants and selling plants and installing plants. But we gotta talk more than plants are pretty. We gotta talk about particularly health and well-being. And
Yeah.
I have a whole initiative, or we here at Texas A&M have a whole initiative, a Plants, Nature, and Health initiative.
Mhm.
We're really diving deep in terms of the research and the outreach on the benefits of plants and that human-plant interaction.
Sure.
We as an industry have traditionally done a poor job of talking about those things, but that's on us if we continue down that path, right? We gotta
Yeah.
gotta continue saying from the top of the mountain that, we're part of the solution for a lot of societal issues.
Sure.
Childhood obesity, bullying in the schools, and I'm just thinking about kids, and scholastic performance, all that. Plants and green spaces can help solve every single one of those issues. Dementia, Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
Our industry has a direct influence on people's ability to manage those particular diseases. My own father, remember I grew up in a nursery business in Western
Yeah.
Carolina, and it's small. My dad was a millwright at the paper mill there in Canton, but we had a small nursery business that put my sister and I through college, and we grew a whole lot of plants, even though we didn't know what the best quality was at that point, but the industry was growing, so we sold a lot. I don't know how I got off on that story, but the, I think the point was, yeah, I don't even remember the point. What was the question again?
Well, I mean, you were talking all about relationship building and focusing on the
I
benefits of
remember now.
plants.
You got me back on it. Thank you. So that you got to be able to articulate that sales messaging. And so we were a small business, but we were successful because when dad load up the truck, I'd go to the garden centers and I'd peddle my plants. And I got really good at asking them two questions. What are you having difficulty getting?
Mhm.
And what is it you're getting now that you're not satisfied with? And I'd shut up and I'd listen with 2 ears, and I knew at that point that was as a formula for success was listening more than I was talking, and it served me well. And so I learned a valuable lesson even back then that your sales messaging is pretty important.
Yeah.
So you gotta talk about the health and well-being because people will spend money on staying healthy and their overall well-being.
Mm.
Ask me how I know. 'Cause, that's a quadruple bypass and a heart attack earlier in the year. I'll do what it takes I'll spend what it takes to make sure I'm surrounded by, health and well-being, and I'm not gonna scrimp on my health, right? And that's the plants have play a role there. And I was talking about, kids and so forth and the societal issues, dementia and Alzheimer's, and this is why I brought that up. I'm coming
Yeah.
a full circle, is that my own father passed with dementia. But when we could get dad outside, just potting up a plant, just simple thing. He was like the old dad again. He was telling jokes and so forth and, making jokes about how short I am and so forth because he was taller than me. But the point was is that it was dad, and he was
Yeah.
outside, had his hands in the dirt, so forth. But when he got him inside, he was just a semblance of the man that I grew up with.
Mhm.
I've seen firsthand, Brian, exactly what plants do to people and
Yeah.
how our lives are improved. And there's some major societal issues that our industry can help solve, and we just need to make people more aware of that. And we
Well, and I think too, it's
that, then they're willing to pay more for our plants.
Absolutely, and I think you're seeing more partnerships. You know, it's not this. It's been talked about in the industry for a while, but it always seems like there's little pockets here and there. Now, whether it's the work that you're doing at Texas A&M, or what NC State's doing, or what American Floral Endowment is doing, and then along with that, you've got programs like Seed Your Future that are building the next generation who seem to be very much focused on topics like this. It's not just about getting somebody who has a background in horticulture who can grow the plants, but it's everything else that goes into that is really, I think, going to be something that drives the industry forward.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it any better myself. And I'm glad you mentioned all those entities because that's one of the things that gives me hope for the future is the fact that we've got folks that are saying we can't keep doing what we've always done or we'll get what we've always gotten.
Yeah.
And that didn't get us too much in terms of expanding market demand. So, just, Seed Your Future, for example.
Mm.
There's 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 more people in the Department of Horticulture here than there were because we're using some of the resources that Seed Your Future developed.
Yeah.
We take ninth, 10th, and 11th graders and even before that, 7th, 8th, ninth, and 10th graders that and we teach them about horticulture and teach them to be a treeologist, and then they can learn that, oh, well, that's really being an arborist, right?
Yeah.
Cool, and then get them into the field, and then, teach them the rest of it. So it's creating some excitement about being in our industry, and that's we're a growing industry,
Mhm.
pun intended, and it's quite exciting to think about the future and the changes in technology and how we're implementing automation, mechanization, robotics within the industry.
Sure.
I tell my students all the time, you don't have to change your major to horticulture, but you can minor in it. And you want to be an attorney? Absolutely. We need attorneys in horticulture. You want to
Yeah.
To be a chemist? Man, I'm glad to hear it because we need new formulations for plant protection products in the green industry. You want to be an engineer? Man, more time power to you because we need engineers in the green industry. So it's it's how you position things. It's how you couch it. It's how you talk about it
Yeah.
and promote it. And that's what I'm excited about.
Well, and it goes back to your point about Seed Your Future. I will never stop talking about their careers page of their website because it outlines all the different careers. Some where you're, involved directly with plants, some where you may not see a plant in your whole time in the industry. But I like the fact that it also outlines, here's the education that you need. Here's what your salary could be. Here's testimonials from folks who have gone through the process. And to your point there's so many different careers in this industry that you wouldn't normally think of. So, I mean, the more that the industry can use a tool like that, the better for them. Um, Before I get to my last question, I want to take one quick look at. I know the last time we looked at your index of prices paid by growers, you're looking at some of the numbers there, and we saw labor, and I know labor is always going to be, the highest of those numbers, and this is right around the time where your quote interim final rule that you mentioned on the adverse effect wage rate was kind of taking shape. You looked at some of the other categories where the total, price level was not at what it was for labor, but those categories seem to be rising at a higher rate than where labor was. How do you see that going into 2026? And what effect could that potentially have on growers as they're budgeting for the cost of doing business right now?
Yeah, I'm thinking it's the slowing down. Now I'm still waiting on the end of the year data
Right.
to plug into my model, and the next revision will come out, mid-February
Yeah.
because I need that data to plug into my econometric models in order to assess. But my gut feel is by looking at the rate of growth of that everything is slowing down in terms of the rate of growth.
Mhm.
And had labor, had the adverse effect wage rate continued on with the previous methodology,
Yeah.
it would have gone up even more.
Mhm.
And then you add tariffs. Because you remember at Cultivate, I said anywhere from 5 to 9% was my best estimate at that particular point in time.
Right.
Didn't deviate too much to today other than labor. And so with you make some adjustments and what I think is going to impact labor and how fast labor is going to be increasing. Now I think we can dial that back to 3.1, 3.2% up to 5%, just depending again on how if the tariffs continue to play out. I'll know
Mm.
a little bit more, but I'm more optimistic than I was on the stage at Cultivate.
Okay, that's good to hear. Okay. So you already asked or answered one of my last two questions about what you're most excited about when it comes to the future of this industry. So I guess I'll ask so you've got a unique role where you can bring in your love of economic trends and your love of horticulture. What do you like the most about this industry that you're involved in?
First of all, I like how dynamic it is.
Mm.
Look, all across agriculture, there are various price support mechanisms, there are various commodity programs that reduce risk, whether it be production risk, um, um, uh, environmental risk, marketing risk, legal regulatory risk. There's a number of government programs in place to help mitigate those risks. You look at the green industry, it's not the Wild West. I mean, we have some government intervention to help mitigate risk, but it's not a lot.
Right.
So there's some pride associated with that. Is that we tend to be successful in spite of the fact that we don't have these props and supports from USDA in various forms and fashion. Now we still have access to crop insurance and those kind of tools. Don't
Yeah.
get me wrong, but I'm just saying if you look at trade policies historically, they've not considered carve outs for our industry, but the other commodities within agriculture, there's all kinds of carve outs. And you look at the $12 billion in terms of the relief that farmers are going to get right now, with 1 billion of it for specialty crops, all specialty crops.
Yeah.
Right? They could have been 12 billion just for the green industry. but it didn't happen, right? So cows, plows, and sows get all the attention, and we're kind of left over here. But there's a certain amount of freedom that goes along with that. We're not tied to government intervention to be successful. I kind of like that.
Yeah. It's funny. I always tell people if you're going to listen to one person talk about economics, it's got to be Dr. Charlie All, because you can make the topic so relevant and so interesting to a market that really needs to learn more about, where things are going. So I want to thank you again for taking the time today to have this conversation.
Well, those are very kind words, my friend, and I appreciate them. And I just, again, thank you for the invite and the chance to pontificate a bit.
Thanks for joining us. You can learn more at greenhousegrower.com. Please subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen, and please leave us a rating as it helps other podcast listeners find the show.